Hello and welcome to ANTHRO 340, Cultures of Online Games and Virtual Worlds. My name is Matthew Kerrica and I'm really pleased to have you in this course. I want to start by saying that regardless of your background, whether you've spent thousands of hours in MMOs or you barely picked up a game in your life, that this course I think has something to offer you. The readings are challenging, the fieldwork is unlike most anthropology courses ask of you, and the questions we're going to be asking together are ones that I genuinely do not have settled answers for. So let's start here. I want to say a few words off the bat about what this course is and how it works before we get into the intellectual content for this first week. At its most basic, ANTHRO 340 is an anthropological examination of online games and virtual worlds as social spaces. Easy. We're going to ask what kinds of social life happen in these environments, what kinds of communities, economies, hierarchies, and cultural practices emerge in and through games. How do people make meaning here? And what can the anthropological toolkit, developed to study societies across the world and across history, actually tell us about what's going on in a game like World of Warcraft or EVE Online or any of the other virtual spaces that you'll be spending time in this semester? Now, the key word in that last sentence is you. One of the distinctive features of this course is that you're not just studying games from the outside. You're going to be playing an MMO, a massive multiplayer online game, or more broadly some kind of persistent online virtual world, and you're going to treat that experience as ethnographic fieldwork. Just as an anthropologist might go and live in a village in the Pacific or an urban neighbourhood in West Africa, you're going to immerse yourself in the social world and try to understand it from the inside. That means choosing your game carefully. The most important thing is that your game is genuinely social, that it has other players in it, that you can talk to them, that you can participate in things together. One of the M's in MMO stands for massive, and that matters. These are supposed to be persistent environments where you bump into strangers, where unexpected things happen, where you have to navigate social situations you didn't anticipate. If you're in a game where you're mostly playing alone, I'd strongly encourage you to reconsider your choice. The second thing I'd say about the ethnographic component is this: do not play comfortably. I know that sounds strange, but what I mean is, don't just play the game the way you'd normally play it. Don't just grind through quests on your own or stick to the parts of the game you already know. Put yourself in situations that feel a little awkward. Talk to people you don't know. Join a guild even if you feel out of place. Follow people to Discord servers and other places not in the game but in satellite to it where interesting things are happening. My own PhD supervisor talks about what he calls productive discomfort. The idea that the richest ethnographic experiences come precisely from the moments when you feel uncertain, out of depth, and slightly embarrassed. That discomfort is data. It's telling you something about the social norms of the space you're in. And keep notes. Keep notes constantly. I cannot stress this enough. The longer you leave it to write up what happened, the more it flattens out. You'll remember the broad strokes, but you'll lose the texture, the small embarrassments, the split-second decisions, the things people said that didn't quite make sense to you. Have something next to you while you play. A piece of paper, a voice recorder on your phone to capture things as they happen. And then later, write those up into fuller, more reflective journal entries. The journals are where you start to move from raw experience to interpretation. In terms of the reading and writing assignments, I'll have more to say about those as we go. For now, just know that this course takes academic writing seriously. The readings we assign are real scholarly texts, some old, some very recent, and the expectation is that you'll engage with them on their own terms, quoting them, citing them, and putting them into dialogue with your own experiences in-game and with each other. Writing to a reader who doesn't already know what you're talking about. That's the discipline I'm asking of you. But enough about the mechanics of the game. The course. Let's talk about the ideas. Here's a question worth sitting with at the start of the course. Why would an anthropologist study games? Anthropology, as a discipline, has always been drawn to the parts of human life that don't obviously do anything. Ritual, myth, art or gift exchange. Things that seem from a certain instrumental perspective to be a waste of time and energy. Things that don't produce food, don't build shelter, don't serve any obvious survival function. And yet, these are often the things that anthropologists have found most revealing about a society. Because it's precisely in the things people do when they don't have to that you learn what they actually value. Games are like that. Almost every human culture and every time and place we've been able to study has had some form of play and some form of games. You'd be hard-pressed to name a more universal feature of human life. And yet games are not incredibly particular. Games are also incredibly particular. The cockfight in Bali is not chess. Chess is not an NFL game. A raid in World of Warcraft is not a game of cards. Each of these has its own history, its own rules, its own social world, its own relationship to the broader context in which it takes place. So when anthropologists look at games, they're always navigating this tension between the universal, whatever it is about human being that makes us play, and the particular, the wildly different forms that playing takes in different times and places. That tension is what the 3 readings for this first week set up, and it's exactly why I put them together. We have Huizinga, who gives us play as a fundamental category of culture itself. We have Csikszentmihalyi and Bennett, who give us play as a universal state of experience. And we have Geertz, who gives us play as a particular cultural text. 3 very different starting points, and yet all 3 are trying to answer the same question. What is a game? And what does it do in the world? Let's take them in turn. Johan Huizinga was a Dutch cultural historian who published Homo Ludens in 1938. The title translates as Man the Player, and the central claim of the book is announced on the first page. Civilization arises and unfolds in and as play. Not that play is a feature of civilization, or an activity that happens within it, but that play is constitutive of it. Language, law, ritual, art, philosophy. Huizinga argues that all the great archaic activities of human society are permeated with play from the start. So that's a sweeping claim, and Huizinga knows it. He doesn't try to prove it in full. The book is a cultural history and not a scientific argument. But the grounds he clears in chapter 1 is the foundation everything else stands on, and it's worth spending some time there. His first move is to observe that play is older than culture. Animals play. We can watch young dogs and see in their gambols all the essentials of human play. The ceremonial invitation, the mock anger, the rule that you don't bite your brother's ear too hard. Play precedes culture, precedes reason, precedes civilization. Which means it cannot be explained by appeal to any one of those things. It's more basic. And from this he draws a strong conclusion. All play means something. It's not noise, it's not reflex, it has significance. He's equally impatient with the biological explanations that were fashionable in his time. Play is a discharge of surplus energy. Play is a preparation for adult life. Play is wish fulfillment. He surveys them all and finds them uniformly inadequate. Because they all commit the same error. They assume play must serve something other than itself. They treat play as a means to some end that isn't play. But the fun of playing, the thing you're actually trying to explain, resists all analysis and all logical interpretation. You cannot reduce it to anything more basic. You can deny, if you like, nearly all abstractions, he writes. Justice, beauty, truth, goodness, mind, God. You can deny seriousness, but not play. So what positively is play? Huizinga works through its formal characteristics, and it's worth rehearsing these because they'll come back explicitly in next week's readings, both as resources and as targets. First, play is voluntary. You cannot be compelled to play. The moment it becomes obligatory, it ceases to be play in any meaningful sense. This quality of freedom is what separates play from work, from duty, from the demands of biological survival. Secondly, play is not ordinary life. It is a stepping out of real life into a temporary sphere of activity with a disposition all of its own. Every child knows this. They are only pretending. And yet, and this is important, that knowledge doesn't diminish the seriousness with which they play. The contrast between play and seriousness is, as Huizinga puts it, always fluid. A game of chess is played in profound seriousness. A child's game of make-believe can be utterly absorbing. The fact that it's only play doesn't make it less real while it's happening. Thirdly, for Huizinga, play is bounded in time and space. It is played out within certain limits. It has a beginning, an end, and a place. And where Huizinga introduces the phrase that has done the most work in game studies ever since. All play moves and has its being within a playground marked off beforehand either materially or ideally. The arena, the card table, the magic circle, the temple, the stage, the screen, the tennis court, the courts of justice, all are in form and function playgrounds. Forbidden spots, isolated, hedged around, hallowed, within which special rules obtain. All are temporary worlds within the ordinary world, dedicated to the performance of an act apart. The magic circle, a temporary world within the ordinary world, where different rules apply. We're going to be coming back to this concept in some detail next week, because it becomes a flashpoint for some important debates. For now, just hold the image. A space set apart, marked off, consecrated to play, with its own rules and its own order. Fourth, play creates order. Inside the playground, rules are absolute. The rules of a game are absolutely binding and allow no doubt, he says. And Huizinga draws a distinction that Consalvo will take up directly in next week's reading, between the cheat and the spoil sport. The cheat breaks down the rules while pretending to follow them. They still acknowledge the magic circle, still want everyone else to play by the rules while they secretly don't. Society is surprisingly tolerant of cheats, Huizinga says, but the spoil sport, the one who simply refuses to play, who walks off the field, who reveals that the whole game is just a game, is cast out, because they shatter the play world itself. By withdrawing from the game, he reveals the relativity and fragility of the play world. He's not wrong that it's fragile, but the community needs to not think about that. Fifth, play generates community for Huizinga. The feeling of being apart together in an exceptional situation, of sharing something important, of mutually withdrawing from the rest of the world and rejecting the usual norms, retains its magic beyond the duration of the individual game. Guilds, sports teams, the regulars at a poker table, the crew that raids together every Thursday night, play communities tend to persist. Finally, Huizinga connects play to the sacred. Ritual, he argues, has all the formal characteristics of play. It's bounded, rule-governed, set apart from ordinary life, conducted in a spirit that is at once serious and also only pretend. The priest performing a sacrifice in a formal sense is playing. This is not diminishing ritual, but rather elevating play, recognizing that both belong to the same order of human activity, the one that most truly expresses what is highest in us. As Plato has it in Huizinga's epigraph, life must be lived as play. Now, Huizinga's thesis is magnificent. And it's also, as we'll see next week, quite vulnerable. The magic circle is a nice concept, but it assumes something that turns out to be very hard to defend in practice. That you can actually draw a clean line between the game world and the rest of life. Consalvo's entire argument is that you can't. And Malaby will argue that even wanting to draw that line reflects a particular and historically situated set of assumptions about what games are for. But we'll get there next week. For now, Huizinga has given us the vocabulary. So let's move on to the second reading. Csikszentmihalyi and Bennett's Play as a State of Experience. From 1971, an exploratory model of play offers one of the most elegant and influential attempts to define what play actually is. Not what games look like from the outside, but what the experience of playing feels like from the inside. Their starting point is a critique of how we normally explain play. Why do people play? Because it's fun. Full stop. That's usually where the conversation ends. And Csikszentmihalyi and Bennett point out that this is basically no explanation at all. Fun is precisely what we need to explain. What is fun? What is happening phenomenologically when someone is lost in a game? Their answer is built around a model with three states. The first is anxiety, a state in which the requirements of the situation outstrip the abilities of the actor. There are too many demands, too many possible things that could go wrong, more happening than you can manage. Think about your first 10 minutes in a new game you've never played before. Not knowing the controls, not knowing the rules, not knowing where to look. That disorientation, that edge of overwhelm, is anxiety. The second state is boredom, a state in which the abilities of the actor far exceed the requirements of the situation. There's not enough happening to engage you. The game is too easy, too repetitive, too predictable. Nothing requires your full attention. You're going through the motions. And then there's this third state, the one that Csikszentmihalyi would develop and name more explicitly in his later work as flow. Flow is what happens when there is a kind of balance, when what the situation demands of you and what you're capable of doing are almost perfectly matched. In this state, as they put it, awareness merges with action. You're not thinking about what you're doing, you're just doing it. The world narrows to the present moment. You lose track of time, you forget yourself, you forget your worries, you forget the things you're anxious about in the rest of your life. You are, in the fullest sense, absorbed. This is a phenomenological description. It's about the quality of experience. But Csikszentmihalyi and Bennett are also making a structural argument about what games do. Games, they suggest, are essentially design technologies for producing flow. They limit the field of action through rules, through a defined playing space, through a start and a finish. They constrain what you have to pay attention to and what choices you have to make. And in doing so, they create the conditions under which that ideal balance between ability and challenge can be sustained. They put it directly, a good game is one that allows the player to sustain the experience throughout a relatively long span of time. That word, designed, is worth pausing on. Games are not natural phenomena. They are artifacts built by people with intentions about what they want players to experience. Csikszentmihalyi and Bennett are describing the effect, the psychological state of absorption, the conditions that sustain it. But they're not yet asking about the cause. Who builds these machines? For whom and whether the experience they engineer is equally available to everyone. So hold that question in mind, because we will return to it. They quote the British rock climber Chris Bonington, who describes the experience like this. At the start of any big climb I feel afraid, yet once in, it's not nearly as bad as you feared. In fact, it's enjoyable. Once I start climbing, all my misgivings are forgotten. That transition from fear and self-consciousness at the threshold to complete absorption once you're in is exactly the movement from anxiety to flow. And crucially, Csikszentmihalyi and Bennett note that this state is not unique to games. It can happen in any activity where the right conditions are met. A musician deep in a performance, a surgeon operating, a craftsman at their bench. Games don't have a monopoly on flow, but they are specifically designed to produce it. That they're suggesting is arguably what distinguishes a game from other activities. Not the presence of competition or the presence of rules alone, but the intentional engineering of an environment in which flow becomes possible and sustainable. Now here's what I find genuinely interesting about this framework, especially as we think about MMOs. The balance between challenge and skill is not fixed, it shifts. As you get better at something, what used to be challenging becomes routine and boredom starts to creep in. This is actually one of the central design problems in game design. How do you keep players in the flow zone as their skills develop over time? Level systems, difficulty scaling, endgame content, new raids, seasonal updates, these are all, in Csikszentmihalyi and Bennett's terms, engineering solutions to the problem of preventing boredom while avoiding anxiety. Getting that balance right in a persistent world where thousands of players of wildly different skill levels are all playing simultaneously is extraordinarily difficult. And it's one of the things worth paying attention to in your own gaming this semester. When are you in flow? When are you bored? When are you anxious? And what conditions produce each? Now let's turn to Geertz. And I want to start where this essay starts, because the opening of Deep Play, Notes on the Balinese Cockfight, is one of the most memorable openings in all anthropological writing, and it's worth attending to closely. Geertz and his wife have just arrived in a Balinese village. They're there to do field work, and for the first 10 days or so, the villagers essentially act as if they don't exist. They look right through them. Nobody speaks to them directly. If they approach someone, that person drifts negligently away. Geertz describes feeling like a non-person, a spectre. This is a very recognisable experience for anyone who's ever arrived as an outsider in a tight-knit community. And then there's a cockfight, and in the middle of it the police arrive. A truck full of officers with machine guns, and suddenly their entire superorganism, hundreds of people packed around a ring, comes instantly apart. People scatter everywhere. Roosters with razor-sharp spurs are running loose. Everything is dust and panic. And Geertz and his wife, on some instinct, when in Rome as he puts it, also run. They follow a stranger into a compound. They're sat down at a table, given tea. And within moments a policeman walks in and finds these two white American anthropologists sitting there peacefully as if they'd been there all afternoon. The host of 5 Minutes, a man they'd barely met, immediately invites an entire story covering for them. And the next morning, everything is different. The village is suddenly open to them. People want to talk. People want to retell the story of their running, imitating their graceless style, their panic-stricken facial expressions, and Geertz reflects that in Bali, to be teased is to be accepted. Because, by running, they'd stopped being observers and become participants. They'd been caught up in something. They'd had something real at stake. And that had changed the relationship to the community entirely. So let's hold that opening in mind as we move into the argument of the essay, because it's doing more than just setting the scene. It's making a methodological point about what it means to study games. You can't really understand what a game is doing by watching it from outside. You have to be caught up in it. So what is the cockfight doing for the Balinese? Geertz's answer is dense and fascinating. He begins with the observation that the identification of Balinese men with their cocks is total. Men spend enormous amounts of time with their roosters. They groom them, feed them special diets, bathe them in the same herbal preparations used for infants. They talk about them constantly. The cock is simultaneously a symbol of masculinity, a projection of the self, and this is where it gets philosophically interesting, also an emblem of what the Balinese most fear, animality. The Balinese, Geertz notes, have a profound revulsion towards animal-like behaviour. Babies are not allowed to crawl. Even stumbling or clumsiness is considered shameful. And yet the cockfight brings that animality right into the centre of social life. Contained within a strict set of rules, the cock is at once the idealised self and its shadow. So Geertz introduces next the concept of deep play, a term he borrows from the utilitarian philosopher Jeremy Bentham. Bentham's original meaning is almost condemnatory. Deep play is play in which the stakes are so high that it is, from a rational standpoint, irrational to engage in it. The potential losses outweigh any plausible gain. By Bentham's lights, the heavy gambling in cockfights is simply irrational behaviour that should be regulated or prohibited. But Geertz turns this argument inside out. He argues that the money, while it matters, is not really what's at stake. The really important wins and losses are not financial. They're about status, about prestige, about standing, about who you are in relation to other men in this community. In The Deep Cockfight, he writes, an owner and his collaborators put their money where their status is. The betting pattern reveals this. You bet on the cock of your king group, your allies, your village, and you bet against your rivals. The structure of who bets with whom maps almost exactly onto the structure of social relations in the village. Geertz catalogues this in detail. Rule after rule governing who must bet on what, under what circumstances, with what consequences for getting it wrong. The cockfight is not a break from social life. It is a performance of it. And this leads to what I think is Geertz's most important formulation. He calls the cockfight not a reinforcement of status hierarchy, but a meta-social commentary upon it. The distinction matters. The cockfight doesn't simply reproduce or confirm existing social rankings. It tells a story about what those rankings mean, what they feel like, what it is to live inside them. It offers what he calls a Balinese reading of Balinese experience, a story they tell themselves about themselves. And then this extraordinary sentence about what attending the cockfight teaches the Balinese man. What he learns there is what his culture's ethos and his private sensibility look like when spelled out externally in a collective text. The game externalizes something that is usually internal and taken for granted. It makes visible, publicly, dramatically, viscerally, what the social world feels like from the inside. The deeply played cockfight, Geertz argues, is a form of sentimental education. So now we have two very different ways of thinking about what games are and what they do. Let me put them side by side because the tension between them is productive, and it's a tension that will run through this entire course. Csikszentmihalyi and Bennett give us a universal model. Play is a psychological state. Flow is something that can, in principle, be experienced by anyone, anywhere, in any kind of activity. The rules that structure a game are there to sustain that state. In this model, the content of the game, what it's about, who's playing it, what the social stakes are, is almost beside the point. What matters is the structural relationship between challenge and skill. Geertz gives us something almost the opposite, a particular model. He's not interested in what the cockfight does to the nervous system of an individual player. He's interested in what it means within a specific social world, with its specific history, its specific hierarchies, its specific anxieties and aspirations. The content of the game, the cocks, the spurs, the betting coalitions, the social affiliations is everything. Strip all that away and you don't have a different version of the same game. You have something unrecognisable. And here's what is difficult, but also important about putting these side by side. Both are right. At some level, there really is something universal about the experience of absorption in play. Csikszentmihalyi and Bennett are describing something real and recognisable. you can recognise it in yourself and your own experience. And at the same time, Geertz is also describing something real. That games are never just games. That they're always embedded in social worlds, and that this gives them meaning. That content and context and history always matter. The challenge for anthropology and for this course is to hold both of these simultaneously, to take seriously both the experiential and the social dimension of games, to ask at the same time, what is this like from the inside? But also, what is this doing in the world? So why does this matter for MMOs? The so what question. I want to close this week by saying something about why these texts are such good starting points for thinking about online games and virtual worlds specifically. If you've played any kind of MMO, you've almost certainly experienced something like Csikszentmihalyi and Bennett's flow. The moment when you stop being aware that you're pressing buttons and start just playing. The way hours can pass without your noticing. The particular quality of engagement when a boss fight is pitched at exactly the right difficulty. Hard enough that you have to be fully present. Easy enough that you have the skill to manage it. Game designers have a phrase for this, the sweet spot. Csikszentmihalyi and Bennett's model is the sweet spot in applied form. Or rather, the sweet spot is the model in applied form. But if you've spent any time in a real MMO community, in a guild, in a raid, in a competitive PvP bracket, in a trade channel, you'll also note that the social texture of these games is never just window dressing. Hierarchies form, reputations matter. There are unwritten norms about how you're supposed to behave, and breaking them has consequences. There are unwritten people have enemies and allies. Relationships between players carry real emotional weight. In short, something very like what Geertz is describing in the Cockfight is happening in these spaces. The MMO is not just a game world, it's a social world. And that makes this course, or the questions we ask in this course, that's what makes them so interesting. And also, genuinely unresolved. What's so interesting is that these social worlds exist inside products made by corporations, mediated by technology, accessible to millions of people across the world simultaneously. The Cockfight has been around for a long time, the MMO has not. What stays the same when we move play into digital, networked and commercially produced spaces? What changes? Who benefits? And who doesn't? Those questions will organise this course. I want to name 3 of them now, not because we can answer them yet, but because I want you to notice them accumulating as we go. The first is what I will call the boundary question. Where does the game end and the rest of life begin? Geertz's great contribution is to show that the Cockfight ring is not sealed off from Balinese social life. The kinship alliances, the status hierarchies, the communal anxieties all flow through it. The magic circle leaks. As we move into digital worlds, that leakage becomes even more consequential. Virtual economies turn out to produce real money. Online identities carry offline histories. And what happens inside a game has consequences well beyond it. So we'll be pressing on the boundary question from every angle this semester. The second question is the assumed player question. Every game assumes someone. The rules were written for a body, a history and a set of competences. Who is that person? Huizinga's Homo Ludens presents play as a universal, but the cultural historian writing in 1938 has unstated assumptions built into his framework about gender, class and whose play counts as civilization's highest expression. As we look at how games are designed, who are they designed for, and who gets turned away, that question will become increasingly specific and increasingly uncomfortable. And the third is the play-work question. If games are, as Csikszentmihalyi and Bennett say, design technologies for producing flow, then someone built the machine. Someone decided what conditions would sustain absorption and what would break it. At what point does that engineered experience stop being play? When someone is paid to maintain it? When they have no choice but to keep going? We'll follow that question across the semester as well, and its answer, when we reach it in the final weeks, is not a comfortable one. Keep all three in mind, and I'll see you in the discussion boards.